Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us on another Coinfirm live webinar experience. Delighted to have some of the most preeminent experts in the fields of investigations and forensics, especially within this crypto environment. Before we kick things off, obviously there will be certain areas and subject details that we won't be able to delve too deeply into, so we need to see our guests furiously shaking their heads. We'll probably might need to move on from those subjects. And of course it's live and interactive, so please do enter any questions you might have, and within reason we will go through them and ask our guests to comply. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panel. If I go from left to right, Nick, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, I guess, depending on where you are. My name is Nick Fern. I've been a digital investigator for almost 20 years, which I know I don't look old enough, but it's been about 20 years. And I started doing cryptocurrency investigations about 4 years ago. And then in 2018, wrote and published Investigating Cryptocurrencies, which is still the only book in the world on the subject at the moment. And but was very happy to do that. And I'm managing director of CSI Tech and also CTO of Asset Reality, which specializes in the sort of the acquisition and dissemination of crypto assets that have been involved in criminality. And most of my time is spent investigating cryptocurrency crime, and we also teach foundation classes on the subject as well. That's me.
Wonderful. And if I can also ask Benedict if you'd be able to kindly introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you very much, and pleasure to be here. Welcome to everyone who's joined us. My name is Ben Hamilton. I'm a managing director at Kroll. I've been part of their investigations team for a bit more than 15 years. Over the last 5 or 10 years, been increasingly looking to use technology to help us with our investigations. And 3 years ago, worked on my first crypto case. I have colleagues in the US who did some a little bit before that. But really, over the last year, that's become a third to a half of what we do, and we see it as a huge growth area. It's complex, but it's exciting. We've been working very closely with Coinfirm, enjoyed the benefit of the tools that they've developed, particularly on the tracing side, very, very happy to be here and to be part of this conversation.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Benedict. And last but by no means least, Pavel, do you want to give a quick introduction?
Hi, Ryan. Hi, everyone. I'm Pablo Kuskovsky, CEO of Coinfirm, founder of Coinfirm. So we are the leading blockchain analytics company for AML. And last year, we also launched assets tracing and recovery capabilities very successfully, also with the portal, which is called Reclaim Crypto. So I guess we're going to talk a little bit more about this.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for those introductions. I think let's jump straight into it. I think there's often an area which is a little bit smoke and mirrors and misunderstood, and I think people really would love to understand a little bit more around some of the process involved. One of the first questions that we have on this subject is, what do I do? What happens when I've been hacked, if I've been spoofed, if someone's come and stolen my funds by waving a wrench in my face? What are the first actions that I should be taking if my life savings have just been drained from my wallet? How about Nick? Would you like to take that one to start with?
Yeah, I'd go to a Bitcoin talk and ask for help, actually. That seems to be what an awful lot of people do. It's amazing how many investigations I get involved in. And actually, there's already an entire thread on Bitcoin talk about it. Actually, in seriousness, it's not a bad thing to reach out to the community, but the problem is you don't know who's responding. And I think that's the issue. In fairness to law enforcement, certainly here in the UK, law enforcement is getting better at understanding a complainant who said, look, I've been hacked, I've lost cryptocurrency. We've now got some very good people within UK law enforcement. But then, of course, we've got the likes of people like Kroll and ourselves who can work privately to try and get involved in the track and trace and the legal aspects of hunting down people that may have done you financial harm. So, the community can certainly help, and I certainly wouldn't diss it. The police can certainly help, but their hands can also be tied in some ways. And so there's a role for the sort of the independent investigator as well.
Brilliant. And Ben, obviously, you've probably seen maybe the majority of these cases. Obviously, we won't go into any specifics, but often they can be a little bit more complicated, I think, as Nick has lent to, than simply, here's the wallet address, my funds have been transferred to, can you go and get those back for me, please? Would you maybe like to go into a little bit more, maybe some of the nuances of some of these cases?
Sure, Ryan. I mean, the kind of the starting point. I mean, the first thing to realise, I think, is that the laptop or the mobile phone that you were connected to the internet through, a device you were connected to the internet through, is a crime scene. If you have been hacked, and there are kind of some precautions and ways of preserving information from there that are a specialist area in themselves. Actually, I know Nick is one of the people we consult on that kind of question. So maybe he could talk a little bit more about that. But as you say, there are many different ways in which coins can leave a wallet. And I suppose from a tracing perspective, there's a number of different ways of looking at it. There's trying to work out who did it, and kind of following the person, and then trying to get assets back from the person. And there's following the cash or following the crypto. Neither are particularly easy or straightforward. There's no kind of fire and forget magic tool that will give you the answers. A lot of it is about piecing together the patchwork of clues from both sides of the investigation to help inform the other. Typically, in a case like this, we don't know initially who did it in terms of a name, but sometimes we're able to link them to other similar crimes that have happened, which gives us maybe a bit more of an idea of the pattern of money flows. I mean, we could talk about this in a lot more detail, Ryan, but just to kind of summarize, I think, the trace is itself quite a difficult thing to do. There's a lot of ways one can follow some of the money from a wallet, but building the case with sufficient force for a civil court to agree to take the draconian steps of freezing the account or compelling the exchange to give the name of the person who does it, one needs, we believe, to follow accounting principles, which have been kind of tried and tested previously in civil courts, and apply that to the blockchain. When you've got the trace, again, that's not the entire answer. There's then a complex manual process that needs to be gone through by intelligent, trained investigators looking to understand whether there's a mixer involved, whether there's another service involved, whether there's a possibility of some kind of transaction having happened between the wallet where it was stolen from and the exchange that you've traced it to, or if there was, can you argue that they were complicit? And then there's kind of questions about how much the exchange should have known or could have known at the point of accepting the Bitcoin, which might be relevant to damages later. But in broad nutshell, those are the kind of considerations that we have in mind. And I guess the more one kind of practices in this area, the more nuances one understands and spots.
If I could just pick up on something Ben said about the mobile phone or the computer or it being a crime scene, that is so important. The amount of time that we rock up and we say, so, where was the wallet that you were stolen from? It's on this computer. Have you been using it? Oh, yeah, I've been using it for the last couple of weeks. And then they just noticed that the crypto's gone. And they're stomping all over essentially those sort of forensic artifacts that we're able to extract. And I think just to add to what Ben was saying as well, I actually give a conference speech called There's No Such Thing as Cryptocurrency Crime, which is slightly odd considering how I make my living. And actually, before you ever get to the crypto, a theft is a theft. And there is other evidence. Let me give you a really quick example. So we received a call and we worked with a police force. I better not say who it is, but we got a call from a guy and he'd lost $250,000 in Bitcoin. He'd cashed in his pension, put it all into Bitcoin. And what he'd done is that when he'd created his seed word, so for any of you that don't know, when you set up a wallet of some description. Generally now you get a sequence of between 12 and 24 words that can recreate your wallet. He'd written them on a little card, which he'd put in his wallet, which was in his jacket, which he hung up in the staff room. And then he mentioned to his boss, can you keep an eye on my jacket generally, because my seed words are in my wallet. So when that $250,000 got stolen, is that a crypto job? I'd suggest not. You want to go be talking to the staff at the place where he was working. You need to be talking to the boss. You need to be following those clues. And then there is a crypto aspect to the investigation. So I'm not doing myself out of a job here. There is often a bigger set of evidence than just the crypto evidence.
I think that's a really brilliant point, Nick. And Pavel, obviously, with Reclaim Crypto, we unfortunately see a very large volume of inquiries coming in at these kind of initial stages and sort of working out, ways in which we can be engaged and if we can help. Would you like to maybe elaborate on maybe some of those initial struggles? So when people are coming, to us with a case or to others to be able to investigate, the things that they need to be prepared for in terms of, the evidence they might be able to present, or what their next steps really are after that hack has taken place.
Right. Okay. So in terms of, the importance of evidence is critical, right? So what Ben and Nick said, is critical. That's this is what I learned as well. But forensics evidence, is very important. Many times, at the initial outset, we don't know if we're dealing with victim or criminal, actually. So you never know. Someone could report, for example, something with, funds were stolen, and someone is actually hiding the funds from his wife, right? So that's pretty critical in terms of understanding and evidencing, the whole chain of events, right? And that's what our Reclaim Crypto team in Coinfirm actually is doing initially, right? So understanding the value of understanding whether the claim is actually legit, because we have I think half of the addresses would be someone reporting some old empty GOX, for example, addresses, right? So which we need to filter out even before actually the team is receiving. So there's a lot of work done on the evidencing. The better evidence we have, the better decision can be made. We can also understand whether this is part of bigger scheme, whether this is actually something, much bigger. We actually, in many cases, we can connect perpetrators from different, let's say, claims into one bigger scheme, right? And that's from, let's say, engaging farther or tracing funds that's critical. And also in terms of recovery, it's critical.
Fantastic, thank you, Pavel. And I think one of the areas that I'd love to delve into on this, Nick, and you kind of lent to this in your first answer, was the role of law enforcement. So when you typically might look to get law enforcement involved, and obviously how that's kind of approached from sort of a public and also a private sector as well. Maybe Nick, with your experience, you could go into a little bit more on that.
Yeah, sure. I have to say, certainly in the UK, where we have a fundamentally trustable police force. And of course, we don't have that everywhere in the world. But we are fortunate to fundamentally have that in the UK. And it's been really good that the NPCC, which is our National Chiefs Police Council, have been taking crypto very, very seriously now for the last few years. They've rolled training out. It was our training. Anyway, they rolled training out across all the police forces in the country, and that was fantastic to see. And they're now doing other types of training on tools that they're using. And so I think we can now go to law enforcement and make a complaint about a suspected or a known theft. And we should see that is being dealt with appropriately. Now, Ben will back me up on this, that actually we're often seeing large losses go to the police and come to private and investigation groups as well. Because where the police are excellent at investigating and maybe finding somebody to put in prison, perhaps not always as good at finding the money. That's not always their number one priority. Their number one priority is bringing people to justice. not necessarily making restitution. So that can be where that crossover between, and right now, Ben and I are working with a police force on a large theft and working very, very well together. And so Ben's group are working very, very hard at trying to work on the reacquisition of those funds from various exchanges. And the police are working very hard with suspects that they have and following that chain. So I really would say a little bit of everything works very, very well indeed. Because of course, when you do get things like proceeds of crime asset seizure, that can take quite a while to go back into the pot of the person that lost it. Whereas if it can be acquired through different means or reacquired through different means, then that can be good. But I'm not going to sit here and say, try and do the investigation through a third-party company. I would always say go to law enforcement. You need that base covered. And there will be things that police can do that we can't do. And so you do need to have that in play. I don't know if you'd agree with that in every case, Ben?
Yes, I would. I would, Nick. Absolutely. I think it's obviously important to. I think there are lots of reasons why it's important to lodge it first with law enforcement. First of all, even if they don't help, being able to say as part of your civil claim that you did report it to the police shows that you're serious as it's a crime. Secondly, you don't know, how big a situation law enforcement is looking at, of which you're one small part. And I think one of the difficulties in terms of recovering stolen anything, any stolen property, cash, crypto, anything, is the cost of recovery is reasonably significant to do it privately. Now, there are lots of ways around this. There's third-party funding, but one of the most effective ways around this is being part of a class action. And the police, effectively kind of monitor that kind of thing. When there's 100 people who've lost £1 million, obviously that rises the crime up the police prioritization scale. But equally, trying to create those coalitions so it can work privately is another way. I mean, the key problem for law enforcement is that they operate within national boundaries, and very few crypto crimes are actually executed and committed within the national boundary. In fact, I'm not yet aware, or there's very few, put it that way. So the structural challenges they have to effectively progress this are quite significant, which is why in cases that that you're familiar with, Nick, and that Kroll has does fairly regularly, there's kind of partnerships between the two. But certainly no, as a first point of call, it makes a lot of sense, and it may be, as Nick alluded to, that this is actually about finding the guy who ran off with the wallet, or maybe there was no crypto, maybe they took the cash but didn't buy the crypto. There are a number of different ways in which the police can be very effective, and it's not a waste of time, even if one does end up looking to do it privately.
Interestingly, actually, I just noticed on the chat, there's a chap called Rob, says he's in UK law enforcement. I know Rob very well. And if he doesn't mind me saying so, I think he runs one of the best crypto investigation law enforcement teams in the UK at the moment. He's going to blush now. But he does make that comment, we can't do it alone. And that's really good to see, actually, that there is a realization between law enforcement and private that we can work together to have some hopefully effective results when these types of crimes happen.
Very good. Yeah. And obviously, I think you guys lent very well to this within crypto, just because of the global nature of crypto. Sometimes, this complexity element can come into place.
Yeah.
Pavel, maybe this is an area you might like to go into a little bit more, because, in a traditional crime, someone breaks into my house, they steal my TV. It's probably going to stay within London. It's not going to go overseas. It's not going to be, broken into many different parts and then spread across various other areas. Pavel, maybe you could go into a little bit more of what you've seen in certain cases, and typically the approach that might be taken by a third party when funds are split across potentially many different exchanges or many different wallets.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the biggest struggle in terms of assets recovery in crypto. But this is like the crypto market is truly international and truly global. And same with funds being hacked, or criminal activity, and the funds which are coming from this is actually spread across different jurisdictions, right? And from my perspective, that's actually very critical element to get the answer for is how we cooperate internationally to recover these funds. If we don't do this truly internationally, that's the crypto world going to be really affected in a negative way, because if you cannot recover funds because it's spread across 3-4 different jurisdictions, it means that you cannot recover the funds, and the cost of recovery. What Nick mentioned. Engaging police. That's fantastic. But if we have police in 5-4 different jurisdictions immediately, that's becoming really very difficult to work on, and some jurisdictions not cooperating. Then we have the network of lawyers which are working with us to kind of, if we know exchanges or if we know any other entity, to sue this entities. But again, this is truly international work. So the answer, where is the jurisdiction? Which jurisdiction is actually responsible for this? Where is the lead? And there's a lot of answers. I mean, questions still not answered. In this space, but. Every case is international, so that's given. We working with Crawl, with other partners to create this truly international coverage, right? And we hope over time we also are going to add police to this, law enforcement, where we actually will be able to add this all different components. I mean, for me, the lesson about assets recovery is, one, it's very complex process, right? It's very complex process. We try to automate and help as much as possible on the way in terms of crypto recovery. But I think the market, we need to find some patterns and proofs of how the things can be done internationally. So that's exactly the challenge. That's exactly the challenge of people asking us when we gonna get our funds recovered. Well, it takes time and it takes a lot of effort.
I think it's a really good point you bring up, Pavel, and it's the nature of how how fragmented these cases can get, but also the need for there to be cooperation between jurisdictions, between exchanges, to have process in place, which allows these things to be a little bit more automated.
If I might pick up on that quickly, Brian, sorry, if I might pick up on that. I mean, Pavel's absolutely right. If there was a way to improve cooperation between jurisdictions and exchanges, that would go a long way towards helping. But I think the fact that there has been, to my knowledge, no successful civil recovery yet. I mean, I'm working with Pavel on a couple that we think will resolve it quite shortly. But I think one of the reasons why that hasn't happened yet is just around the novelty of this space and the fact that the amount of investment of time to understand and build the claims is reasonably significant. It is complex, but I don't think we should give the impression that it's impossible. No civil claim is simple. And there's an enormous experience already about how to make claims and recover claims around fiat, and this is simply applying the same principles to cryptocurrencies. The ability to kind of get crypto exchanges to respond to legal orders, I think, is only going to improve as the anti-money laundering regulations and sanctions increase around the world. Thanks, Fern.
No, I think it's a really good point, and obviously for our industry to be able to go to that next stage, there needs to be these methods of recourse and safety and security, that the people know that if they are wronged, there are channels they can go on and they can potentially be effective. I mean, from a sort of a consumer point of view, as you sort of lent to, it is very difficult in these reclamation cases just because of the complexity and obviously all the good work that you guys are doing. Are there certain steps that you'd advise consumers to take, both from, I guess, in terms of where they're potentially trading and holding these types of assets, and what they might be able to do to, to actually ward off bad actors, certain steps that you might advise. Pavel, I'm going to put that one to you because I know you've been involved in that quite a bit.
Yeah, I guess, definitely, the problem with this approach in general is that many of the transactions, like the exchanges on the receiving ends in terms of funds, right? So in majority of the cases so far, they already received funds, and then they learned that actually these funds were coming from hack or any fraudulent activity, right? And from our experience with exchanges, the closer you get to the time from hack into depositing these funds into exchanges and notifying the exchanges, the better is for recovery, both in terms of our recovery, but also protection for exchanges and other operators like custodians on the market, right? So that's becoming critical, right? And that's something which with our technology, we are, becoming this kind of, engine where we have notification in real time, and more and more of our clients are receiving this kind of notice as opposed to freeze the funds, because there's potential claim for this, But we have to be very, so that's understanding of how diligent we have to be on the claim side, right? Because we don't want to send notification to exchanges or custodians, to banks who are moving into crypto, saying like you receive funds from fraudulent activity, and someone's funds were stolen and misappropriated, right? And you receive them, because this would be completely wrong notification. But we need to be getting into the area where we have live tracing and live scenarios, and we already have some cases when we actually work with exchanges to notify them on the base, and some of the exchanges are very proactive in cooperation. Some of the exchanges would be freezing funds, some of the exchanges would be willing to return the funds. Obviously we are early in this process, and we're going to encourage more and more exchanges to work with us and work with the broader team on this type of approach.
Is there perhaps a little bit of a taboo element when dealing with exchanges? Obviously, one of the biggest headline grabbing things in our industry is when an exchange gets hacked or an exchange receives stolen funds. And obviously, in some cases, I imagine that there might be a little bit of reluctance to straight away admit that might be the case. Maybe Ben, you can maybe go into that a little bit more. How's your kind of experience been in terms of how exchanges are looking at this area, and if you're seeing some change from maybe how they might have operated a few years back?
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I think exchanges are on a spectrum between those that have been set up either with criminal motivation or with very poor governance and are highly risky to put one's funds in. And at the other end of the scale, you have more mature businesses which are looking to make sure that they have adequate cybersecurity and they have adequate regulation and processes to prevent financial crime. And as a business which kind of offers consulting services around both of those areas, we've noticed a definite increase in the number of inquiries we've had over recent years, and I'm pleased to say we're working with a number of exchanges who are mature in that kind of space. I personally follow, for my personal activities, I follow a very simple rule, which is I try and do my kind of trade and my business in places where the regulations are mature and the police forces are mature, because if anything does go wrong, I've got some recourse. And I think that would be my advice, is to work with places where the standards of regulation, but also the quality of police response, should something go badly wrong, are there. And even if the police don't do something, you want that company to have been keeping the kinds of forensic records which might give huge clues to a private company such as ours. Very, very quick story, Ryan, if you'll bear with me. we were called in a few years ago to an exchange who'd suffered a hack, which ultimately proved to be to make them insolvent, and they ended up going bust. It appeared to have been a digital hack, but the investigation actually showed that it was one of their technology partners who had learned how their business worked, and then ended up kind of stealing the money themselves through quite a clever fraud. Luckily, that all took place in an exchange who was keeping those kinds of digital records. Without that, it would have been very hard to solve.
Can I just make?
Yeah, and I think.
Sorry, Pavel. Apologies. You've got to remember, if we take Binance, for example, Binance was founded in 2017. In 2018, it was the largest cryptocurrency exchange in the world. And we've only just started 2021. These are baby businesses turning over billions. And then we all sort of jump up and down and say, why haven't they got proper self-regulation? And why haven't the governments, regulated more? This is a baby industry. And so although I can be the first to be really ticked with exchanges because of sometimes their lack of self-governance and their lack of desire to interface with law enforcement and ourselves, they haven't had time to build the processes. We're not talking about, Lloyd's TSB that have been around for 1 billion years and have every regulation process in place. So governments are rushing to catch up. Some governments aren't in a rush to catch up. But we are seeing, as Ben was saying, there are some countries where we have exchanges that are working, that we're now getting regulation. We got some decent FCA regulation coming in now in this country. So we got to be really, really careful. And if people are listening because they want to invest and they want to be involved and they don't want to be ripped off, I'm completely with Ben. You need to be working with exchanges that are in territories that now have regulation. And that's very, very important. And we could talk about security of your own coins if you want to at a later point. But yeah, I don't think we can beat up the exchanges too much. They are baby companies. No. And they're huge babies. Agreed. That's the problem at the moment.
I think it's a really valid point, as you say. I mean, 4 years to be turning over the volumes that someone like Binance is just absolutely unheard of for a 4-year business. It just doesn't happen elsewhere. I mean, we're starting to see, more mature products come into the space as well from some of the centralized exchanges. So, we're seeing lending, we're seeing staking, but we're also seeing some of the more, let's say, compliant exchanges starting to introduce insurance-based products. I mean, have you sort of experienced working with any of these insurance providers? Have we seen any of them actually have to pay out in any sort of given situation, or is it still a little bit new in terms of that service being offered? Because I think the first insurance products came to market maybe a year ago, maybe 18 months ago. Ben, I'll let you go into that one.
I don't know a lot about it, Ryan, but it seems like a very sensible and welcome development to me. You do get some kind of credit insurance with your kind of normal fiat bank, and I find it hard to understand why that kind of scenario can't be brought in. There's certainly a key part of that, I guess, is the insurance company or the exchange having the confidence either to make themselves secure enough for the premium to make sense, or for any stolen money to be recoverable enough. And I think we're certainly at that point where that could all make sense. And I think it's a development to be thoroughly welcomed, Ryan.
Is there and Pavel, you shared this with me the other day. Is there potential risks with insurance from an exchange point of view? More so in terms of, I mean, we've seen this before. We've been through, in this very short period of time, probably me and you more than the other two chaps, where we see these big booms and increases within prices, and everyone scales up their businesses, and then we get this big drop, and it might be 70%, it might be 90%, and businesses have been scaled to an extent where they can operate where the price is up here, and then the price drops to down here, and it becomes a very different kettle of fish within a bear market. And Pavel, I'll get you to go into this. Is there potential where these insurance policies may be abused in these cases, where certain exchanges may be, running on fumes, and we might see more actual kind of insider-based frauds taking place.
Yeah, I mean, we discussed it before the call, that exit scam is actually part of our language in crypto, right? So the projects which are set up from the start, in order to get money in and, to exit. But I think, that's early days in terms of insurance for the sector. It's even difficult to get insurance when you are kind of, working for the sector, almost like you get this audium of actually, oh, your revenue is coming from the crypto sector, so you are, dangerous sector. So insurance, I think it's not yet there in terms of, being easily accessible, right? And I think, this is, I mean, the insurance business is on the risk-based approach, right? So we need to understand the risk properly. So far, there's not so much, tools available, to understand this risk. But I would imagine that, considering like what we see on the exchanges, on the market, we can see that, this exchange is acting weird, right? This exchange is actually losing a lot of money, right? Deposits from this exchange are actually dropping dramatically, So that's also, indication of like you can do pretty good due diligence from, let's say, even from not getting into the systems. So potentially for insurance sector, it could be very interesting sector, right? Because that's like in banking, you would see all the incoming, outgoing transactions in live scenario, and you could assess whether the bank is liquid or not, whether the bank has, sufficient funds to maintain deposits and etc. So I think it's going to be really attractive market for insurance over time. I completely, echo what Nick said, that, it's early days in the industry. We have these big babies still, we don't know it's going to be, what's going to, grow up from these babies. That's another, question, whether we're going to have, good citizens or criminals. That's, I think, there to be asked.
I think one of the problems with insurance, actually, I'm not aware that anyone's paid out. There was a very interesting comment on the chat. Ben Peach said that there were insurance products in 2013 on the London market and that Coinbase bought insurance back then. I've got no knowledge of that, but it's really interesting. I have to look it up. First one I was involved in was Wilson's Auctions, that were doing proceeds of crime storage for UK policing. They got Lloyd's of London insurance back in 2018. And the due diligence there on the processes that they had to say, we will do this every time to protect the assets, was onerous in the extreme. Now, the issue is, what is a theft from an exchange? So if somebody working for the exchange nicks a bit of crypto, who's liable for that? Is that an insurance job? Is it an external hacker? Or if I am a user of Coinbase, say, for example, and I get socially engineered such that somebody circumvents by using an attack on me personally to circumvent my account to log in and move crypto, is that an attack against the exchange? Is the insurance going to pay out on that? Or is that my responsibility? So I think it's really, really interesting, actually, how the insurance companies, are these going to be essentially these sorts of insurances that just frankly never pay out, because there will always be a loophole because, you can't just insure loss, can you? I mean, there has to be a process around that loss. So it's going to be really interesting to see where that goes. And I'm a little teeny weeny bit skeptical. My dad was an insurance broker for Willis his entire adult life. So I sort of grew up around insurance broking. It's going to be interesting.
An expert in loopholes and
Yeah. They insured the Titanic back in the day. So I've no idea if they ever paid out on that.
Absolutely.
I think in defense of some of the insurance people that we work with and have consulted with, I think it's only fair to say that insurance is only as good as the terms, and I know there are terms which cover the kinds of scenarios you mentioned, Nick, but the difficulty here, I think, is the mismatch between the places where the crimes are happening and the ways in which the crimes are happening, and the places where the insurance is going. And sadly, you know, a lot of the crime and a lot of the losses are taking place in circumstances where you know, they're working with unscrupulous actors and they're being conned. So I mean, I don't know if now is a good moment, Brian, to talk about how to protect one's own personal Bitcoin. But yeah, I think there's a certain amount of responsibility one has to take oneself ultimately.
I think it's a great segue in, because you've, especially right at the moment as well, where you have this great debate around keeping your funds on centralized exchanges or self-custodying. And the self-custody conversation has become even more important because of this huge rise within decentralized finance and these kind of automated money making platforms, which you could potentially contribute to directly from your own ledger or your MetaMask and not have to touch a centralized exchange. You know, the volumes are now there. We're seeing Uniswap regularly on a daily basis hit higher volumes in trading than Coinbase. But both approaches have their own risks. I've heard of a lot of MetaMask hacks from spoofing. I've heard of a lot of people have their centralized exchanges broken into and their funds go as well. Pavel, maybe you could go into, you know, the sort of the differences between the two approaches and maybe some tips on securing your crypto.
I think what I like about our industry is, I mean, we kind of, you know, accustomed to looking our own security, right, in terms of the funds, right? So, you know, I think it's still early days for, you know, true protection of the assets. You know, from my perspective, I'd rather keep my asset, my Bitcoin in my wallet rather than on the exchange, right? And there's a simple reason that, you know, then you don't know who is running this, you know, how they're running this, you know, so there's always this risk of, but I think it's changing, you know, this actually changing, you know, like definitely we have some great exchanges on the market, which, you know, like 100% almost secure as you know, banks, right? So that's I think, you know, it's actually improving. But if you know, I think, you know, what Ben said, you know, about actually keeping, you know, choosing the right provider, that's critical, right? In the right jurisdiction, that's another aspect. So that's critical as well. You know, seeing, you know, what is the reputation, you know, seeing what's the AML process for these exchanges, right? Whether they look after you know, compliance or not. Because from, you know, long term, you know, what we see is actually almost like 60-70% of exchanges which are gone, you know, because, I mean, majority of them would not have proper, you know, risk analysis and risk assessment, right? So I think, you know, like in principle, keep it with yourself, you know, but I think that the market is changing and the market is growing to accommodate, you know, less, let's say, professional crypto people.
I think that's absolutely certain. And not wanting to dwell too much on the personal risk, because I think we could have a whole episode of this with security experts talking about separate laptops and private keys and where you hold your ledger and splitting up these various things in MPC. One of the things that really has come to the forefront in the last year or so are ransomware attacks. So where we're seeing quite unscrupulous actors who are really mean. I mean, they're going after hospitals, they're going after healthcare, they're going after these small businesses and effectively, you know, just completely taking them out. I mean, we saw it with Garmin last year, where Garmin purportedly, allegedly, I'll put that in there, had to pay hackers over $10 million in Bitcoin to be able to regain control of their systems because they were taken down for 3 days. Now, this is a bit of a hornet's nest because on one hand, you obviously have a business which is not operational, potentially medical devices are being turned off and a hacker is demanding funds, but there is a level of complexity around those ransomware attacks in terms of if you can pay and how you might go about that. Ben, maybe I can see you're itching to get in on this one. Maybe I can hand that one over to you to go into a little bit more.
Sure. I mean, well, I'm fascinated by ransomware as well, and have been looking to find an insurance company that would be interested in chasing the payments that they've made. Sounds like we have some people from the insurance community in the chat, and you know, it's very, very feasible, and I think it's just a question of time before someone does that and recovers a lot of money that way. It is a tricky question, Ryan, because as you say, you know, if your business critical system has been captured and the amount of money that's being asked for is appropriately pitched, it's a very difficult proposition to turn down. What I would urge people to do is think, you know, are their information systems or digital systems business critical? And if they are, take the steps in advance to mean that they can recover from a ransomware attack, and then be able to kind of smile it off when it happens.
Yeah, I absolutely second that. Ransomware survival is about pre-planning. I know we're sort of going off slightly from sort of tracking crypto, because at the point you're tracking crypto, you should have messed up a lot of times down the line to get to the point where you've actually had to pay. So pre-planning, pre-training, an awful lot of the underlying exploitation comes from phishing attacks, social engineering attacks against your people. So the first thing you need to do is fire everybody. I'm kidding, but you need to be doing, you know, sort of phishing training and social engineering training for your people, for them to understand what they're not clicking on, what they're not opening. Obviously, you need good walls, good firewalls, good intrusion detection systems, all that sort of stuff. But then actually you need to be practicing. I mean, back in April, you know, we had an intensive care unit shut down by ransomware, and it was only just through whatever that there were no patients in that ward at that time. I mean, this is absolutely terrifying. These people do not care. So there's an awful lot of technical, but there's also protecting and training the people to stop these types of vulnerabilities being exploited. But yeah, practice and having a methodology. So offline backups and proper offline backups. Do you remember we used to put stuff on tape and keep it in a safe? Now, I appreciate we can't do that with terabytes and terabytes of data anymore, but offline backups of key systems have sort of gone out of, they're just not done so much anymore. And actually that is the way to recover from decent ransomware, because they will go looking for your backups. And they will try and encrypt those backups.
The other thing, the other thing I think that should be shouted, you know, to anybody who's interested and can listen about this is, so the Kroll cyber division spends a lot of its time helping people recover from ransomware attacks, and one of the key things that they tell me that you know, more people should be aware of is that the ransomware attackers almost always leave something behind so they can come back. And the need to kind of purge systems or quarantine them, or as Nick said, just throw them away and back up from something that you know is clean, is really imperative.
And it's absolutely terrifying. I think you make a good point in terms of, you know, the prevention side and ensuring that security protocols are, you know, only put in place to start with, but then also regularly updated and enforced. And it typically is these kind of social attacks where people are able to enter. But Pavel, maybe you could go a little bit more into some of the consequences of making these payments, because obviously in the UK, if you look at the sort of the legal side of this, you're not actually legally allowed to pay blackmailers. And I think there's something very similar in the US as well. Maybe, Pavel, you could go into how companies are potentially navigating some of these personal risks, because obviously if you're paying a hacker in North Korea who's on a sanction list and you're a US citizen, that's probably not the best state of affairs for you on the follow-up. Hacked and then potentially maybe even, you know, persecuted yourself.
Yeah, I think, you know, this is, I mean, at the moment, I believe, you know, majority of people who would be even considering paying ransomware would not consider that they can be paying to, you know, North Korea or terrorists, right? So that it's not even, I mean, right now it's becoming a point on the agenda, right? And especially in the US, as you know, that's becoming an issue, and it's being discussed, you know, whether ransomware actually should be paid, right? But I think, you know, that's the nature of ransomware. You don't actually have a chance to not to pay, right? So I guess that's a question of, I mean, if you don't have to pay ransom, don't pay it. But in many situations, you don't have any opportunity not to protect yourself from this, right? So I think this is it's very complex. I think it needs to be taken into consideration. But I think regulators asking for for this kind of approach would be very, very demanding, I would say, for anyone, and who is taking responsibility if you are not able to pay ransom and you actually losing your data, right? So in this situation, what's actually happening? I think you could argue that potentially this could stop ransomware from happening, but I doubt it. I highly doubt it.
Very good.
Yeah, there are a few companies, Ryan, but only very few that I've come across that war game ransomware. And they view it as a company-ending event, like a fire. So you can imagine
Right.
a massive fire that takes out your headquarters, and it could be a business-ending event. Ransomware is the same. It needs wargaming. And so you need all the key people in a room one day and say, right, we've just lost email. We've just lost this. We've just lost our intellectual property server. We've just lost, right, where do we go from here? And actually, it's only when you've got those processes in place that actually you're going to have rapid recovery and potentially recover from a business-ending event. So wargaming these things can be very important. I know we're going off topic of crypto a little bit, but I feel quite strongly about it.
I think these are really good, useful points, because often you only consider these things after the event, and being sort of pre-prepared and being able to be more in control as they do happen is of utmost importance. Deviating a little bit, I mean, one of the things we have seen more and more of, especially in the sort of the DeFi space, and we've experienced this firsthand, is where actual DeFi protocols or AMMs themselves get exploited. So whether that's a very smart, intelligent smart contract exploits, where they're able to play an arbitrage play, whether they're simply able to just remove funds from the pool. And one of the problems that does come up on this, which personally I find intriguing, is a lot of the founders of some of these protocols are by nature anonymous. They want these things to be able to live on via smart contracts and not to be directly held liable for anything, let's be perfectly honest. But when a hack takes place, what is their recourse? We've seen a lot of these bounties be sort of pushed out to the network to sort of vigilantes to get involved and try and recover some of these funds which are hacked. How successful do you think that approach might be going forward with some of these more anonymous founders of protocols? I'll let you go into that one then.
Great. Well, I mean, I'm not a big believer in bounties, but I think they're an interesting innovation in the market. Truth is, whether it's ransomware, whether it's a hack, there is a very straightforward way to recover it, which is about collecting the evidence, finding where the money is, getting legal authority to seize it, take it back, or find out who did it, find out where they live, take their home. That is, at its heart is a very simple strategy. The difficulty is when the cost of doing that, because of the complexity or because of where they live, is out of balance with the amount that you get back. But I mean, that's where kind of being smart about how you organize who the client group is, whether it's the police helping to put together, an idea that actually this is, okay, the loss here was just 1 million, but the picture they're seeing is a crime group who took 150, or whether it's done through private channels, like the Reclaimed Crypto website that Coinfirm operate in conjunction with ourselves, where individual users can register their loss, so that if a critical mass assembles that maybe could get third-party funding, we can then get the funding necessary to get the court cases organized. But I think investigation and recovery is, I would do, wouldn't I? But I think that's the right way to kind of solve these problems. find the person who's responsible and make them pay.
Very good. I realise we're coming sort of to the end of this, and I think we could probably go on for half an hour more, but you know, just keeping it in the nice sort of time of around an hour. I thought it'd be nice to close on maybe just some very simple steps that you personally would take. You know, if this horrible situation came about, you know, maybe the first things that you would need to do, the steps, the process, and then you would go through. So, Pavel, you've lost your hundreds of bitcoins. You know, what's the first thing that you would do, being based obviously where you are in Poland?
Yeah, 100 bitcoins. I think that's the right amount, you know, to kick off the proper process. You know, so that's that's internal joke. You know. No, I mean that's definitely the time is of essence, right? And that's critical. So you know, notifying us, notifying Crawl, notifying anyone else who can help immediately. You know, do not wait. I'm not sure if going to Bitcoin Talk or Reddit or anything like this would help. You know, I think it's actually quite opposite, because then it's actually the case becoming public, especially when you have large amounts, and you start to either be approached by the wrong actors again, or you simply are informing criminal what you do and what you expect to what information you actually have. So that's something not getting the right people immediately, Coinfirm, Crawl, Nick, whoever is like professionally operating in the space. Yeah, and then what guys said at the beginning is like, that's a crime scene. Your computer, your phone, provide as much evidence as you can, so everyone is sure that we're dealing with the right person, the right assets. But time is critical.
Fantastic. That's a brilliant summary. Ben, I'll put this one to you. Where do we need to progress as an industry? What are the things you'd like to see from maybe the various parties which when you're looking into these cases you need to liaise with? What needs to improve to make this a safer space?
I think some benchmarks on standards around quality of care at the exchange level, quality of information recording, ideally some kind of synchronization between national legislations so that the rules are more or less similar globally around asset recovery, and increasing the capabilities and awareness in the law enforcement and investigation spaces, so that these things can, more of these issues can be investigated, hopefully more and more efficiently.
Fantastic. And Nick, as the only one in this webinar who's written a book on the subject, in the whole industry, apparently, this is what you said to get on here. So, the only book on forensic investigation of cryptocurrency. Just build you up a little bit for the final comment. Would you have any more to add to obviously Ben and Pavel's points?
It's difficult to know, of course, who's listening and where they're all from. And I'm going to say something really unhelpful to people that are already investing in this space and maybe have already had losses. If you don't know what you're doing, don't get into bed with cryptocurrency yet. The exchanges, as we've been taught, are not banks. They're moving that way, but they're not yet. The regulation is not quite there yet. Keeping your seed words in your filing cabinet is not a bank. And so I'm still, I had a friend of mine a couple of years ago say to me, should I buy Bitcoin? And I said, no, mate, snake oil. And I've been utterly wrong, of course, when it comes to Bitcoin. So I said to him last week, do not take investment advice from an investigator. But as an investigator, I would say, if you don't know what you're doing, then do not buy what you are not prepared to lose, because there's an awful lot of people out there looking to take it off you. And if you don't know what you're doing, it's easy to socially engineer you out of your funds. If you do know what you're doing, brilliant. But even then, huge amounts of caution needed, because to be honest, however much, if you call me and say, I've lost $5 grand in crypto, I'd love to help you. I just can't. it's going to cost more than 5K to even start looking at this. And, you know, we're not vastly expensive in what we do, but it's an expensive game, these investigations. And so, you know, be prepared that if you get into this, you're going to be a target. Be cautious. But if you lose large amounts, then we're here to help. And I'm just sorry that we can't always help the little guy. But bear in mind what has been said about the reclaimed Bitcoin. So many of these people that are thieving Bitcoin are part of a bigger group. And actually, if either law enforcement or Coinfirm working with Kroll can identify these big groups, you know, there are financial institution scams that you can buy from Eastern Europe right now. They even give you the template for the website, and they will launder your money. You know, so they are part of a bigger whole. So if they do you for 10K, it may be worth being part of these eventual class actions where we may be able to go after some of these people. But sadly, very, very difficult if your losses are small. They're big to you, but they're just not enough to make it worth an investigation team getting involved. But that doesn't mean you can't go to the police because they're free.
Fantastic. Some really brilliant, insightful, sage advice. We've just come to the hour mark, so I'd just like to close off by saying thank you so much for being so insightful and very open. I thought with, you know, the nature of you guys, it'll be a bit more closed and we get a few more, you know, I'm not answering that no comment type responses. So I'm delighted we're able to go into such depth. Obviously, we'll be sharing everyone's kind of contact details, LinkedIn and what have you. I apologise to anyone who didn't have their question answered. We had a huge stream of them coming in. Obviously, ongoing cases with Kroll, with Reclaim Crypto, you know, please do those appropriate channels. The webinar will be put up on demand in a matter of days. So if you do know someone who's been affected, who might, you know, gain some advice, helpful advice for reclamation or even prevention, please do send them the link. Nick, Ben.
And last point from my side, I think, you know, it's worth saying, you know, to people on the, you know, participating in this event, that, you know, we need to create pressure on exchanges because many times, you know, actually they need to do more.
Very good. Very good. They've made a tremendous amount
Lovely.
of money. It's probably the time now that they start increasing their protection and recovery process. I think that's very fair. Brilliant. Well, once again, thank you guys for joining. Great. Thank you everyone who's attended. We'll send out an email to everyone who joined with the on-demand and contact details, you know, for our panelists. And we will see you at the next one. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you everybody. Thank you all for listening.
Lovely. Thank you everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.